Et nos amours, faut-il qu'ils m'en souviennent?
Welcome to The Thing About France, a podcast where American cultural figures explore the fascinating and complicated relationship between France and America. I'm Bénédicte de Montlaur, and this is The Thing About France. I met Liesl Schillinger 11 years ago. I had just been appointed as a negotiator for France at the UN Security Council. I barely knew anyone in New York. A friend introduced me to Liesl, and she took me under her wing as her new official French friend. And since Liesl is a literary critic at the New York Times, she was invited to every book party in town, and she took me to every one of them. She's that generous and welcoming. She came to my apartment one morning, and we talked about books, translation, and her adventures in France. Even after all these years of friendship, she surprised me by declaring her love for the most unexpected French singer. Allez, c'est parti! Liesl Schillinger, welcome to The Thing About France. I'm so happy to have you on our podcast, not only because you're a great friend of mine and we've known each other forever, but also because I think you're the perfect guest. You're a journalist, you write about France, you write about French literature for the New York Times, you travel everywhere, you're a passionate translator, so thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on it.
I remember a long time ago you told me that in fact you started learning French when you were 10. And I'm curious to know, what were the images you had in mind when you decided to learn French? Why did you choose this language? What did it represent for you?
I almost can't remember a time when I wasn't fascinated by France. And for one thing, we had a French babysitter who was a nurse who looked after my little brother, Eyre. So he spoke French when he was 2 years old because Christine would say, Ilya, va chercher tes souliers, which means go get your little shoes, and he'd go and do it. And I just remember thinking, my baby brother understands French and I don't. So there's a bit of a competition there. But the other thing was, I was a big reader. I had a reading list my mom made for me, a novel a week, and I read them unquestioningly. And I remember reading Little Women, Amy March, who is presented as being kind of stuck up, but with a good heart. And she goes to France and she studies art and she goes to Switzerland. And so I kind of got that grand tour idea really early. So I wanted to be cultured, like Amy March wanted to be. But also my favorite book as a child was probably Jane Eyre. And Jane Eyre is a governess, a poor, disinherited person who's very determined to distinguish herself and not to be looked down on. And she learns fluent French, and I think German, and she can paint and sing a little bit. So I always wanted to be like Jane Eyre, to be this professor's child out of the sticks who was still going to learn those cultural things that every self-respecting young woman in the 19th century was supposed to be able to do. So I wanted to be an all-rounder like Jane Eyre. That was my goal.
That was very romantic. And how was the reality when you started learning French? Was it as romantic as that? And when you started going to France?
It was much more romantic because it wasn't clouded in fiction and history. It was really happening. I mean, I walk into this college class. I'm 10 years old, and I had to go in the morning before 6th grade.
Why a college class when you were 10 years old? That seems a bit early to go to college.
My mother was very ambitious for me, and my father pretty much did whatever she said. And she thought that he should be able to make something of the fact that he was the assistant head of foreign languages at Purdue University. And she got him to persuade his colleagues that I should be allowed to study French. And so I took it at 7:30 to 8:20 in the morning one semester, then it would be 3:30 to 4:20, and I'd have to ride back on my bicycle to do my paper route. But I walked into that classroom and I felt I had come home. What I learned instantly is that the experience of being French isn't translatable, but I can learn the language, and then I can go there and maybe understand what being there means.
In fact, it brings me to a question about translation, because we both know how wonderful it is to learn languages, because you learn new expressions and new words that describes a reality in a way you wouldn't have thought about. But the problem when you try to translate is that you don't find equivalents in the other language. Like me, I love the word in French, bêtise, which means the kid does something really naughty and at the same time it's really cute.
Naughtinesses.
Yeah,
I mean, but it doesn't really
so
work.
I don't know
Right.
how to translate those words, so I just use them in the original language. So do you have words like that when you translate, that in fact it's so challenging to translate them?
Well,
In English?
often and always, and it's not just individual words, it's a whole sentence. A sentence can be so expressive and cover all the bases in French that's 5 words long, but it takes 28 in English to get across the same idea. I always say that when I speak a different language, I'm apprehending a different reality. Literally, if I'm thinking in French, I'm seeing the world differently than if I'm thinking in English. And I think that's true with every language. Language controls perception. It really affects it. So yeah, no, there's not a one-on-one correspondence a lot of the time, but one of my favorite things about that summarizes how translation works is from the Italian poet Petrarch, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said that a translation is the original as the son is to the father, not the same, but sharing the same blood and sinew.
Wow.
So you're trying to get across the feeling, and it's got to feel related, but it's its own creature when it's translated.
Us at the embassy, we think translation is so important because it's really the only way to bring all those voices from all over the world here in America. But we feel it's a challenge. People don't read that many books written in other languages. So why are you translating? Why did you choose to do that? And why do you think there are not more translations?
Well, actually, I've been writing about this a lot this month. I'm a journalist as well as a translator, and the National Book Foundation, for the first time in 22 years, created a new prize for translated literature because they think it is so important in America to recognize the importance of knowing about other countries and cultures and reading in them. I actually see translators and translation as the advance guard of a kind of soft diplomacy, of something that brings other nations to us in a friendly way and shows us the shared humanity we have with people around the globe. I also think it's simply interesting to absorb different cultures. I've done it in person. I've lived in Russia. That's the only foreign country where I've lived for any serious amount of time. But when you live in another country, you're surrounded by new ways of seeing, new ways of living. But I think you get that same full immersion when you're reading a wonderful book. It's the next best thing to being there. And there are encouraging signs for translation. In the last 20 years, new translation-specific publishing houses have opened all across this country. There are new programs for translation, degree programs, and also just certificates and multidisciplinary programs that are understanding the need for professionalizing this and making it easier for people to acquire proper expertise to do it. But also the number of translated books, literary books, translated each year has jumped the past 20 years from around 300 to around 600. And I've talked to publishers who tell me that these translated novels are punching over their weight. Yes, they don't represent a huge percentage of what Americans read, but they're being chosen as favorite books. They're making bestseller lists. But still, translators are really underpaid. Their work is so hard. And another thing is, it's been a common thing that a person who translated a book, even a best-selling book, their name wouldn't be on the cover of the book. They would be hidden in the credits along with the copyright. It's a co-authorial job, and I think that people don't quite understand that. What draws it to me is just this incredible imperative I have, this desire I have to communicate, and to communicate something I think is excellent, and to share it.
And is there something specific about translating French in particular?
The French language is beautiful. I wish I had the skill to translate from English into French because there's a musical quality to the French language that I love. But also, French words are more pregnant than English words, which is to say, one word may have many more meanings. American English gets very specific, and so just the attempt of elegantly conveying that, of trying to render the beauty of the French along with the meaning, is fascinating. There's a poem by Yeats that talks about the fascination of what's difficult. So literally just trying to convey the author's meaning in language that is half as beautiful as the original French is something that pleases me.
Yeah, in France, we are very lucky because we have the choice. There are many books translated, obviously, and so very often you have the choice of reading in French or reading in the original language. It's the same for movies. You can go to the original version or to a dubbed version. And there is a kind of gentle fight between the people who prefer to understand fully and then they would go to the French version of movies, or people who are adamant. No, it's much better, even if you understand at the end of the day, but nobody would admit it, 50% of it. But no, you have to read in the original language and to watch the original version of the movie. So where do you stand on this?
Listen, given World Enough and Time, I would read War and Peace in Russian, but there isn't World Enough in Time. I read the finest translation I can find of the finest books I can find. I've read a whole lot of French poetry in French. I have not read Proust in French. I'm very sorry. Please don't despise me.
It's fine.
Don't punish me. But I've read some Flaubert, Madame Bovary in French. But in general, I don't know if I feel I'm well served by the translator. I think that's close enough. And I know that you read a whole lot in English, though. And yeah, I'm wondering, have you, because you read more in English than I read in French. I'm talking literature here.
Sometimes, maybe this is something I shouldn't admit also, but now I feel I read much more in English and English literature than I read French literature. And I think because for me, it's a double pleasure. I enjoy the literature and I also enjoy the challenge of reading in another language.
Right.
So I really enjoy reading American literature, and this has been also thanks to you because I'm a member of your incredible book club, and for me, sitting in this group of amazing women, you've gathered this group of authors, translators, literary critic, and it's like having the best college class in America about English literature. Over the years, I felt I read a lot of what needed to be read, and I learned so much. And in fact, I was fascinated by the mere existence of this book club because it's so American. Why do you have those gendered book club?
There was a movie that came out called Book Club that people kind of teased. It was women of a certain age who were friends drinking wine and talking about their love lives. There's a real stereotype that a book club is just an excuse for women to gab and have white wine. The point of ours is actually to form strong friendships with women who are united in their love and interest of literature, but who also can get to know each other better. And so I think one nice thing about having it all women, or all men, or all really confident people, is that people get to say what they think and not worry about what others might say in reaction. So it's a place where people can express themselves fully, and I wanted that to be happening.
We have this bookstore at the embassy, Albertine, in New York, and where we sell French literature and books about French, and everything is in English and in French. And what we've noticed is that people are really hungry and of French classics. Like our American customers, they come mainly to buy books from the French canon, where we are trying also to encourage them to read the contemporary literature. And among the French classical author, French classic literature, their favorite is Proust. And of course, he's a wonderful writer. But why this fascination for Proust over every other writer, over Flaubert, Camus, also excellent and people are reading them, but Proust is really like a saint of French literature. So how would you explain that?
Remembrance of things past, which people now like to call In Search of Lost Time, is so vast. It's so monumental. I think that people almost regard it as climbing Kilimanjaro. It's something that they want to do so they can feel proud that they have climbed this literary summit. It's a personal challenge. That's part of it. His writing is beautiful and intricate and completely recreates a social world. That's part of it.
So
but I think it might be the challenge.
It's a good fit with the American sense of challenge. And
they want to put their flag on it.
And their will to run the marathon, so it's like the literary marathon.
Well, yes, and I don't know who's read a Norwegian book besides a Knausgaard book, but he's also created this 6-volume monolith, and I do think that excites people's interest, a challenge. But there's no question but that people are entranced with the writing of Proust. I don't want to make it look like it's like lifting weights or something. But there are lots of French contemporary novelists, though, that people are aware of. It's, I guess, not fair to call Duras one, but certainly everyone I know read a lot of Welbeck, whether it was The Map and the Territory or whether it was the elementary particles that interested people. And, you just had Patrick Modiano get the Nobel. I've read a lot of his pieces, which are very cinematic and nouvelle vague. People like French film. That's something we haven't talked about. But the impact of French films on the American cultural imagination and on American film is just immense. All of us love seeing Breathless. All of us love seeing...
But once again, is it only the Nouvelle Vague, the New Wave, or do you have anything more contemporary in mind?
Well, as our world's culture is increasingly global, and France is being affected by the rise in serial television as we are. And there are wonderful things coming out in France right now. There's something called Call My Agent, 10%, which is very translatable and very good. There's something called Le Bureau des Légendes, which is a little like our homeland, but very specifically French. I really think that as global communications get more and more interconnected, people are going to become more and more aware of what each different country has to offer, and translation is going to make it more accessible to all of us.
In fact, you don't write only about literature, French literature and foreign language literature in general, but you also write about France in general. I have like this memory of this article in the New York Times about le dîner en blanc, the white dinner, and like it's a kind of very fancy pop-up dinner where people are all dressed in white, they carry their table and their silverware and their champagne, and they all rally in one secret place that is revealed at the last moment, but it can be the Pantheon, it can be the Champs-Élysées, and so you have this giant picnic with thousands of people. So
it's just an amazing spectacle. I mean, it's an act of collective imagination. And this is like a military installation. When they get their thousands, I think there were 5,000 that night in front of Notre Dame and 4,000 in one of the cours of the Louvre. But so everyone's waiting to see where's it going to be, and everyone is carrying like 60 pounds worth of tables and chairs and crockery because people brought real dishes and real food. It's supposed to be an elegant dinner. It's not just you're not just taking a plastic boxed lunch you got from Rite Aid. It's fancy. And everyone lugging their stuff just goes running to throng the place. And then there's this like military array of tables that all line up. They just shoot out and they fill in. It'd be really fun actually to see a time-elapse video of the square filling up in front of Notre Dame. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And everyone's also dressed in white. So it's quite special. And so I guess I like, there's lots of rules, but there's lots of fun and there's lots of excess. And I feel I did like the excess aspect.
Do you think it's revealing of the French way of life?
It's revealing of the French gusto to make the moment as big and as elegant as possible. And I think for the Americans, they're creating a precious memory, and it's beautiful also, and it is still special. But we have so many laws. You can't take over the entire the entire space in front of the steps of the Met or something, the way that France would let you take over the Pantheon or something.
If you have a friend going to France, what would you recommend? Like, what would be a special place, like a special secret place that you would recommend this person to go to?
Well, I really don't swear off the tourist mentality. I'm sorry. I sort of figure if you're an American and you're going to France for the first or second time, why would you avoid the Bayeux tapestry? I have to say, I have never forgotten visiting with my grandparents the castles of the Loire. And I've never forgotten Villandry, which is, I think, what inspired Charles Perrault to write Sleeping Beauty. His version was visiting the enchanted-seeming castle of Villandry. And so I would say, don't just go to Paris. Don't just go to a restaurant and get an excellent, menu and dinner and walk around the museums. Go leave Paris. Do a little exploring. Go and see the Loire Valley. Go and see the Liesl and the monastery where Saint Teresa was, and go and see Bayeux, and then go down to Lyon and check out their wonderful restaurants. I mean, it would be get around. Don't just leave it to Paris. Explore more of France.
And in music, what are the French singers you like?
When I lived on the farm with the Jam kids when I was little, we listened to Daniel Balavoine incessantly. And there's this kind of like triumphant song that Balavoine sang called Le Chanteur, the singer. And he's like, I'm going to be a star. I'm going to walk through the streets. The women will rip off their clothes. They'll bow down to me. And it was just so fierce. And I think I know every word of that song. And
Can you sing it?
Je suis chanteur, je chante dans mes copains. Je veux réussir et que ça tourne bien, tourne bien. Je écris une chanson dans le vent, un air gai rigide,
entraînant.
Allez danser dans les soirées d'un Monsieur Durand. Listen, my tastes in French music are really cheesy. I love 70s hits because that's what the kids were listening to on the farm in Eyre. And so I love the songs by, Daniel Balavoine and Hervé Villard and Pierre Bachelet that probably nobody knows anymore. Like Reviens, elle est là, près de moi, elle est belle. And elle est d'ailleurs, elle a ses longues mains de dentelière, donner l'âme d'un vermeer, cette silhouette. I mean, I just remember them all. And, that was the first translating I did, because when I got back to America, my friends were like, what does it mean? And so I wrote in minuscule type on French paper that I'd taken from my French cahier, all of the lyrics in my translation into English. And then, but when I was in France, they wanted to know what the Simon and Garfunkel song, The Sound of Silence, meant. So I translated that into French.
What would be the Proustian Madeleine for you? What brings you back to France?
This is a little embarrassing because I've been doing this since I was 10. In that first semester of French at Purdue, they showed us a short biographical film about Edith Piaf, and she sang La Vie en Rose. And I was 10, but for me it was a challenge to learn to sing that song, and that kind of became something that my parents would trot me out and make me do at their parties, to sing La Vie en Rose. So I've been doing that forever and ever. And that song has tremendous cultural spread. It's everywhere. I will be seeing a movie and some woman will be singing the song in the movie. And then just recently I saw A Star is Born with Lady Gaga, and she sings La Vie en Rose. And so you'd be surprised. Quand il me prend dans ses bras, il me parle tout bas. Something like that.
And French cheese or French kiss?
French cheese. I'm sorry. I'm a glutton. Listen, French kiss, hurrah, I'm all for it. But if I see a poisse on the table, I don't care how handsome you are.
And maybe if you eat a poisse, you won't get much of a French kiss.
No, I'm afraid a French kiss will be out after that.
The Thing About France is all about exploring cultural difference in France and America. So we thought, why not let our listeners explore it for themselves? Now, until May 15th, we're giving away 2 round-trip tickets to Paris on Air France. All you have to do is subscribe on Apple Podcasts. That's it. Bonne chance, and visit thethingaboutfrance.com for more.